Now, though, to kick the programme off this evening, we need to take a look at China because Xi is preparing the biggest military build-up in history. That's according to the front page of the Daily Telegraph. And the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is to urge China to come clean about this big military build-up in peacetime. Joining me now is Ross Feingold, Asia's political risk analyst, located in Taipei in Taiwan. It's always a pleasure to see you, although the conversations we have are not exactly joyful, but it's always nice to see you, Ross.
Same here, same here. As a Jewish person who's a minority in a ethnic Chinese society, I'd love to talk about the other topic too. Let's talk about China's military build-up.
Apparently, you haven't suffered racism. It's just a little bit of prejudice. That's the crux of it.
Don't get me started.
No, I'm sure. Right, let's talk about what China is up to. That front page of the Telegraph, which is tomorrow's newspaper. Xi prepares the biggest military build-up in history. This isn't a very well-kept secret, is it?
No, it's not. So China has been making very large investments in its military. The published budget, they give us one number, but we know that their actual investment is much higher. And there's a term that experts use. They talk about military-civil fusion, which is another important aspect of this. So keeping in mind the nature of the government and the party and society in general, which is basically to say that the society is controlled by the party, they have the means to activate a lot of civilian resources in a way that other societies don't. Activate civilian resources in wartime. And yeah, sure, in theory, the United States, for example, could activate civilian aircraft if it had to transport troops in wartime. But knowing the U.S. bureaucracy, I mean, we can't even evacuate people from Sudan. So when we look at what China's doing and when they conduct military exercises, and I'm sitting here in Taiwan, where an invasion by China might involve, or would need to involve by definition, an amphibious landing, then we look at, okay, what kind of ships exist, not just in the military fleet, but in the civilian fleet. And actually, in recent exercises, the Chinese military has drafted in civilian resources, such as ships that they would use in an amphibious invasion. So to put it simply, they have an extraordinary ability to activate civilian resources and amplify their capabilities. And it's not just Taiwan, but Japan, obviously Philippines, which has been in the news a lot because of some of the military moves it's making with the United States, and Australia, which is in the news now as we speak because a defense review was just published. And it's, even though it's weird, right? Maybe it's not surprising to folks in the UK, but we see a government in Australia, a Labour government. They're kind of dancing away from, oh, well, it's not really about China. Well, yeah, it obviously is. Yeah. The Defense Review says you need to, we in Australia, I'm referring to specifically, we need to really change our mindset. We need to change how we think about the role of our military. We need to buy different equipment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's what's
it's
interesting.
About China. Yeah. It's not about New Zealand.
Yeah, it is because, and also looking at the longer range weaponry Australia is looking to buy, because originally it's just a very, very defensive military. Okay, so if anybody were to attack the island of Australia, but they're now looking at weaponry that can go much further, and you've got to question why that would be. Like you said, it's not New Zealand. It's the whole region, isn't it? They're not going to war with New Zealand. They're not going to war with Singapore. They're probably not going to go to war with Indonesia. That was something out of 40, 50 years ago, maybe a different era. It's about China and Australia potentially being involved in a conflict further from its shores with its ally, the United States.
And Australia is always very, very careful when it comes to making statements about a military commitment to defend Taiwan. We often assume the United States will come to Taiwan's aid. Again, that's an assumption. But other countries, whether Australia or Japan, they're very, very careful about that. So even if we say, okay, fine, we're not expecting you to commit to defend Taiwan, but it does seem pretty obvious that Australia needs to prepare for a conflict with China. It could be in the South China Sea. It could be in the Indian Ocean. It's going to be further away from its shores. Look, I mean, that's why they're investing in the nuclear submarines as well. But to draw another comparison with the United Kingdom, as far as this new report from Australia, if we go back a few years ago when it looked like Prime Minister Johnson was going to be the prime minister for years to come, his popularity was good, Labour was in disarray, and he talked about a future strategy for the UK in the Indo-Pacific, in this part of the world where I am. And part of that included a military component and possibly a permanent naval presence by the United Kingdom. And then we fast forward a couple of years. We've changed prime ministers a bunch of times. We don't know who's going to win the next election in the UK. And we don't know what the long-term commitment is to spend the money, because this stuff costs a lot of money. And it's also a political commitment, and political leadership has to sell this to the public and say, look, we need to have a forward presence in the Indo-Pacific. It costs a lot of money, and it's risky because it means there's a possibility of a war. So to draw that back to Australia, even though Prime Minister Albanese is kind of saying the right things after this report was issued, we're going to buy into all the recommendations. As we say in American, show me the money. And is this government in Australia going to fund the recommendations and sell it politically? That remains to be seen, just like in the UK.
Yeah, that's going to be tricky. That's going to be tricky, isn't it, to sell it to the Australians? I was reading into these stories earlier on. In fact, when I was at home this afternoon, because, that area fascinates me. And one of the pieces that I read was talking about China discussing, or it's been suggested that 2027 is the year before which China will mount its aggression against Taiwan. Have you seen that? And it's a very specific date. And Xi is saying this can't be handed on to another generation. This has to be dealt with, returning Taiwan, in his mind, to China. Why 2027?
Well, I'll just take a step back and say, since I'm actually a lawyer myself, you get 10 lawyers in a room, you ask them a question, you get 10 different opinions. So it's the same thing with when is China going to invade Taiwan? You get 10 experts together, and they're going to give you a whole bunch of different answers. 2027, sometime in the 2030s, anytime before 2049, which is going to be the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. People like to say 2027, if for no other reason, then that's probably when a lot of the capabilities that China has been investing in and rehearsing in military exercises, they'll really be ready. And they'll be able to mount a combined arms operation involving air, sea, land. People talk about cyber as well now in that conversation. Those capabilities will be ready. And why wait? Why wait for the United States, for example, to improve its presence in this part of the world? The United States is moving a lot of assets to Guam, for example. And then again, that's just like we were talking about with Australia. It's about China. AUKUS submarines won't be ready, but look, maybe Australia will have invested more money in its military by 2027. We could hope. So why wait? If you have the capabilities, you don't want political change to be ongoing here in Taiwan, as people in Taiwan feel, from an identity perspective, less and less attached to China. So you do it. You don't wait once you have the capabilities. You don't wait for your enemies or the other side, Taiwan, to acquire some of the weapon systems. Taiwan has a $19 billion backlog of stuff it's ordered from the U.S. that's yet to be delivered. Wow. Eventually, it'll get delivered, probably starting around 2025, 26, 27, for example. Taiwan has purchased 66 F-16V fighters, but they're rolling off the assembly line very, very slowly. Ukraine war is part of the reason why there's a backlog in deliveries to Taiwan. But again, why wait for the U.S. or Taiwan or Australia or Japan, which has announced its own investments in its military? Why wait? So if the capability is going to be there, Xi Jinping wants to get this done while he's still a relatively young man. He'll be in his early 70s. So they're going to do it when they're ready to. And it could be, as again, some experts say 2027. Other experts say, they'll wait. They can be patient. I like to say Taiwan, the government, the corporate world, the public, the military, they have to assume that the invasion could happen today and act accordingly. Yeah. And if you don't conduct yourself with that mindset, then you probably will lose the war.
God, it's fascinating. Not in a good way, but thank you. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Ross. Thank you so much. Ross Feingold there, who's Asia political risk analyst.